So the title that I gave to Kathy for the bulletin for this sermon was Who Do You Say I Am? And I'm not going to come at that from the angle that we maybe always think we're going to come at that from the Peter, where Jesus is talking to Peter, and he says, well, who do you say I am? And so he talks about that from that perspective. I'm not going to come at it from that angle. I want to kind of reinvent that conversation, and maybe just a little bit, and look at it from the standpoint of us asking someone else, who do you say I am? From their perspective, and getting that insight. And you can either do this in real life or just do this thought experiment in your head and say, if I ask so-and-so, who do you say I am? What are they going to say? What kind of answer might I get? If I go up to someone at work, and someone I work with all the time, maybe my boss, or maybe a coworker, or maybe someone who's under me that I'm managing, and I ask them, who do you say I am? What kind of answer am I going to get to that? And so I think that can tell us a lot about how deep our faith is and how real maybe our faith really is. Who do you say that I am? Who do you people think that I am? This is a medium-sized congregation. My wife and I grew up in a very small congregation. And the larger a congregation gets, we all know it's difficult to really connect one-on-one sometimes. And you have to make an intentional effort to do that. And so some of us know each other better or worse than others because of our spheres of contact and influence and family and friends. And we need to be more intentional about some of that connecting sometimes to really get to know each other, so that if I ask, who do you say I am, that you really have a sense of that. And if you ask me, who do you say that I am, I really have a sense of who you are because I kind of know you. And so the more we do that, the more we're real with people, I think the better off we are in communicating that message. In honor of the teen camp, though, I did come up with a millennial-friendly title. If any of you are any of you news hounds that you like to read the news all the time, and maybe I'm the only one, but Logan and I connect on that. But I read a lot of news, and I like to keep up on what's going on. And some websites are more geared toward, the old fogies, and their standard plain Jane headlines. And then you got the millennial-friendly, headlines that are like, they're all sensational and they get you excited, and it gives you, it's like something to think about. I want to read that. It's all clickbait, right? It wants you to click on that headline. So I came up with a clickable headline for this. It's, do your friends know the real you? Here's the one question you need to ask to find out. And that one question is, who do you think I am? Or who do you say that I am? Because if you ask that question of your friends, your family, your church brothers and sisters here, what kind of answer are you going to get? And I want to think of it like maybe a photo on Instagram that you post with no filters. You've all seen those hashtags, no filters. You know what that means? Maybe 5 of you probably do. So on Instagram, which is basically like Facebook for your phone, your Instagram account is basically photos. These days, it's like a lot of selfies, But it's a lot of photos. It's all photo-based, and you can comment on those photos. But the idea of no filters is that it's real, okay? Because we're so accustomed to things not being real anymore. There's a guy who's on Instagram that is an artist, and so his photos aren't real. They're photoshopped, but they are just incredible. They're breathtaking. And that artistry comes out in these works that people do digitally, but it's not real. But there's something about reality that still we're drawn to, right? When we see that no filters, it's like, oh, that was a pretty good photographer to take that shot. You actually thought about the light and the composition ahead of time. Whereas what's so easy to do on Instagram is, you just take a picture that's more reality and snap that picture of the landscape, and you don't really care about the lighting or composition or whatever, and then you just click a filter and go, maybe this filter looks good. I'm going to do a nostalgic feel, or I'm going to do a bright and cheerful feel, or the photos were kind of washed out on this one, so I'm just going to make this a black and white, make it a grayscale. So you can do things with filters that kind of tweak reality a little bit. But don't we kind of do that with our Christian faith as well? where we kind of tweak reality just a little bit. We come here and we're one person, and maybe we hit the perfect filter for Sunday morning. Or we go to school and we hit the cool filter. Or we show up at work and we hit the successful filter. And I think we do that a lot. I think it's human nature to do that. We present ourselves to who we're going to be with in the most favorable light possible, don't we? Literally, with Instagram, the most favorable light possible, because that's what it's all about, is photos. And so in our life, if we are presenting ourselves always in the most favorable light possible, then we're not being totally real, are we? Now, I would like to have skipped over the fact that it was me that messed up on the songs, but I thought, I'm preaching a sermon on being real. I really need to confess to that and be honest about that. That we all mess up. But what's nice is that as the body of Christ, we all have different parts to the body, and we're all doing different things, and we all work together, and we can recover on a dime and flow. But I was thinking when that happened, how much, do any of you know off the top of your head how much percentage-wise Sunday morning is in the context of the rest of the week? Someone's doing the math here. Close. If you take 2.5 hours, depending if you come to the Bible classes, which I recommend, if you come to the Bible classes, you've got about 2.5 hours, right? Out of a context of, I think it's 168 hours in a week, that works out to a whopping 1.5%. Okay, so you say, okay, well that's not including the time I sleep. I want to subtract that out to make it look a little bit better. So you subtract that out and you get to a whopping 2.0%. So that's how much time we spend here together. And so that tells you some context for how much the rest of our time is in our faith, in our life. That's what's real. What we do here is too easy to Photoshop that, isn't it? It's too easy to click that filter and go, let's get nostalgic today, or let's get perfect, or let's get popular, And those are the kinds of things that we do without thinking about it. Have you ever heard the term an elevator pitch? Some of you have probably heard that term. An elevator pitch is basically in business and marketing. They tell you, in networking, you need to have in your head a little presentation that if someone asks you in the elevator, hey, what do? You got 3 minutes to tell them what you do and communicate that clearly and succinctly so that by the time you get up to the 4th floor, if you're talking to the president of that company, he knows what you do and why and can explain it to someone in 3 minutes. So that's the idea of an elevator pitch. You got 3 minutes to make that presentation. Have you ever thought about your life as an elevator pitch? What do you do as an elevator pitch? If someone says, hey, what do you do? And we run into that situation a lot, actually. Any kind of social situation that we get into, I think we sit down and what's the first question that we ask to get conversation started? Hey, what do you do? Right? And recently I was invited by Todd Grandy, who's a great guy. He's not here. I don't see him. And Kev both asked me at different times to go to Kiwanis with them. And I went with Kev asked me a couple of years ago, I think it was, and then Todd more recently. But what's interesting is that when Kev asked me, I hadn't really thought about an elevator pitch. This is a group of professionals. Usually, it's very service-minded. They're interested in serving the community. Sometimes some of them are retired, but it's really neat people that are out there. They're just purely there to serve and to do things for the community. And so, but in introduction, you show up at this meeting and they introduce you and say, "Hey, Kevin, introduce yourself." That first time when Kevin invited me, I was like, "Well, I'm kind of between jobs, and I kind of do marketing and I do foster care. My wife, it wasn't really focused. It wasn't really an elevator pitch. It really didn't communicate who I am. I went to that one meeting and I thought, okay, that was interesting, and I didn't go back at that time. And then recently, Todd invited me to go, and this time I'm really kind of in a focused area of my career, and with this foster care thing, I'm really on message in some of those areas of wanting to get that message out and communicate that. And I had given more thought to it, and more things had happened in the previous year or so. So when Todd invited me, it was much different. It was a much different elevator pitch when they said, "Hey, Kevin, introduce yourself." And so I was able to talk about, the foster care stuff and how I'm, interested in recruiting new great foster families to be part of this, to give these kids a good home and mentor them and help them to do this successfully. And it went off much better. But that's an elevator pitch, and it can go really bad if you're not focused, or it can really communicate successfully if you are focused on what you actually are. Who are you? That's really what it takes, is for us to understand ourselves, isn't it? So we have to know who we are before we can really communicate that successfully. And if we don't know who we are, that's not going to work out too well. And I know for men, that question of, well, what do you do, is equal to who are you? We get our identity sometimes, and probably not well, not correctly, but we do sometimes get our identity from our jobs, our careers, and that's not necessarily the way it should be. And maybe women struggle with that same thing too. Someone asks you, well, what do you do? Do you say you're a stay-at-home mom, or are you professional, and are you a nurse, or what is it that you do? You struggle with, well, how do you put that into words in a way that is in the most favorable light, right? That's how we think. What's going to present myself in the most favorable light to this person? And so we click those filters. And some of those filters, unfortunately, I think, have a tendency to obscure Christ. If we're clicking the professional filter, or if we're clicking the successful filter, how much of that message of Christ are we deleting out of that impression? Sometimes quite a bit of it, especially if we're really if we're one of those people that are like, well, fake it till you make it, right? And we got to make it look like we're really successful and really we're the best thing going on in town. We're really pushing Christ out of that picture, because that's not who I'm all about. If we're faking it till we make it, Christ isn't even in that picture. And so what I want us to do is think about, if I were to ask someone, well, who do you say that I am? What kind of response is that going to get? Am I clicking filters here to present myself? Or am I being real and developing a real relationship? For some of us, maybe a better question is, do you even have a message that you're intending to communicate? It's one thing to say, well, what is your message? But maybe we don't have a message that we're actually intending to communicate. It's all just kind of happening accidentally. Because we all do have a message, right? I mean, we all have something that is being communicated with people. The question is it something intentional, or is it just accidental? Whatever comes out, and that's just the way it is. This is the real me. If you don't like me, leave me. It's no problem with me. That's not the attitude we should have as believers. But I think that's a very strongly promoted attitude in the world of, well, it's just me. I'm being real. I'm keeping it real. Well, I'm all about keeping it real, but I'm for changing the real me to conform to the image of Christ, so that the real me is communicating Christ. And I think that's what we need to focus on, and being intentional about that. I think it's really great, by the way, to have that organic idea of, well, whatever comes out of me it's going to be authentic then, right? If the real me is Christ-centered and that just kind of flows out, that's a good thing. That accidental sort of ministry where we're serving people naturally because that's who we are genuinely. I think that's a great thing. But there's also something to be said for intentionally saying, you know what, so-and-so really could use an encouragement right now. They're going through a struggle, and I don't really feel like I have the time, but I'm going to make the time to do that because I can see that that's what they need. Maybe that's not so organic, doesn't just happen. We have to make that happen. But I think that's pretty valuable too, is to intentionally seek out opportunities to have an impact. But if we're always too busy or too important or too hypocritical, if those things are what's coming out of us, we're too self-absorbed maybe, or we're too indifferent. If those are the messages that are coming across by our life, our Instagram account, so to speak, that we're too above it all, we're too important for you little people, And those things, those mistaken impressions can come across and can really damage relationships where people feel like, oh, that person's not approachable. I can't really come up and just have a conversation with them and get to know them because maybe they're too good for me or whatever. And so the benefit of being real with people and being honest about our faults and confessing our faults one to another is that we can be real and that we can be iron sharpening iron. Again, that's one of my favorite verses in Proverbs, being iron sharpening iron. I think one of the best... I meant to bring actually a knife and a sharpener because I'm kind of a fanatic in the kitchen about having sharp knives. And I thought I was a fanatic. Mike is more of a fanatic about having sharp knives. And so, but it's interesting that you got steel and you got steel. It's not iron anymore. It's got, these alloys. But yes, steel and steel, they sharpen each other, don't they? But it's not just like, you couldn't sharpen a block of steel with another block of steel. It all has to do with the shape of that steel, right? And then the attitude or the angle at which you attack the other piece of steel. And so I think that's an interesting way to think about this iron sharpening iron. If you approach each other as a block of steel, hammering another block of steel, that's not going to go over too well, is it? But if you are iron sharpening iron, steel sharpening steel as brothers and sisters, and coming at each other at the right angle, not of attack, but at the right angle of, I'm going to hone this person, and they're going to hone me. I'm going to allow myself to be honed by you. Then that requires me to open up to that relationship a little bit more. So those two objects of the same substance, two pieces of iron, can then sharpen each other. So if we ask each other, who do you say I am? How are we going to expect them to know if all they see is that photoshopped me and we never give them an opportunity to be that iron sharpening iron for us and us for them? It doesn't work that way. That requires a relationship and a real sense of community to be able to do that. When I was at my last job, it was funny because I came home from work, the very first day on the job, I came home from work and I described to Diane all of my coworkers, my manager and then a couple of coworkers there, and we were a small marketing department. There's only like 4 people at the time in this marketing department, and one of them just was very kind of cold and not very warm and friendly. Let's put it that way. The other one was very warm and friendly, very personable. You could get to know her pretty quickly. A little bit odd, but then aren't we all a little bit odd, right? But this other person, it was really tough to kind of break through that shell, and it was just like she wasn't being real. And we would have our Monday morning staff meetings. We go to our Monday morning staff meetings, and it would be very matter of fact, very professional. Other people would be talking about their weekend and kind of breaking the ice that way to be real. And she'd do a little bit of that, but it was largely just kind of keeping to the facts, right? Well, on my last day at that job, I went into her office and I said, hey, I just want to say goodbye. I'm going to be heading out. It's my last day and all. And she says, come here. So I said, okay. My manager was out of the office. She was down the hall on a different floor or something, and there was no one else around. So she said, come here a second. I just want to tell you, I apologize for not being very friendly this whole year that you've been there. I thought, well, that's weird. So you realized it, and you still did it. And come to find out, there'd been like 5 people cycle through that position, and she knew that this position is just going to be a revolving door, and she was tired of investing in friendships and relationships in that position because she knew that the manager was eventually going to not work out with that position. So it was really eye-opening to me that there was a decision there. I'm just not going to invest in that relationship because, it's not going to go anywhere anyway, right? And honestly, I see a lot of that in foster care, just to kind of throw that in there, because these kids come in and they after a while, they're like, why bother investing in people, in relationships and families? Because I'm just going to get moved anyway, and it's just going to be yet another home to go to. So if we can be something different in those kids' lives or in the lives of our friends and have our relationships and friendships be more permanent and be more fulfilling and rewarding and iron sharpening iron, then we're doing something right. We're doing something better than what the world can do. I want to go back to this question again of who do you say that I am? I want to read from Matthew 16, verse 13, starting in verse 13 through 15. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked. What do you say I am? I think what's interesting about that is that the disciples had had enough time by this point to learn a great deal about Jesus. They've been traveling with him for a long time, right? But isn't it true that they had literally no idea who Jesus was in some ways? They still thought of the kingdom as being a physical kingdom, didn't they, at this point? Here, we're right up to the end, of Jesus being crucified, and they're still thinking that the kingdom is a physical kingdom, that Jesus is going to die, or they weren't even positive about that because they were shocked. They seemed to be shocked by that even. They were just fundamental things about Jesus and what he was here to do that they had no clue yet. And yet they'd been traveling with him. His ministry was what, about 3 years long? So for 3 years, he heard him preach. They heard him preach. They lived with him side by side, in some cases 24/7, by the side of Jesus. And they still misunderstood what he was all about. But aren't we like that sometimes? How long has our relationship with Jesus been? And do we sometimes still we don't quite get it? We're not quite living it. We're still clicking the filter to be safe and not be vulnerable and be real with people. I think we do that a lot. I know I do that a lot. And we don't get the big picture of who Jesus really is when we fake it like that. I've struggled with trying to figure out how to communicate Jesus in such a way that it produces an aha moment. We all want that aha moment where it's like, okay, they get it. And you can see that in people when they get it. When they go, I'm ready to submit my life to the God of the universe. I want to die to myself and to live a brand new life. And all that stuff that is in the past, it's in the past. It's gone. It's washed away. You want to see that aha moment. But sometimes you really struggle with what's the best process to get there. Because you can explain facts. You can explain the facts of the gospel. And we have several good gospel presentations in the scriptures to look at as examples of that, and some sermons. And we know from relationships what works in talking to people and relating the message of Christ. But sometimes you still struggle with how do you get to that aha moment. And it struck me that I think some of that is something you can't Photoshop it at the end. That starts way back with the beginning of that relationship with that person. It's got to be a real relationship. If we're faking it, and then we're trying to share the gospel with someone, they see it, we're not fooling anyone, right? They can see right through that and go, that's not, who are you talking about being a follower of Jesus Christ? You've done such and such and so and so. So we've got to start way early on to get our lives matching up to the life of Christ in order for that to be a credible message. When we say, I want to talk to you, I know that you're going through some stuff, I want to talk to you about God. If we've been faking it up to this point and everyone can see that we're faking it, that's meaningless to that person. That's just yet one more hypocrite coming in and telling them what to do. But if we're authentic, and believe me, our culture right now is starving for authentic because there's so much faking going on from the top in politics all the way down to every Instagram account that you follow on Instagram. The number of likes is all inflated. Everything's inflated. Everything is fake. Nothing's real. And so our culture is just starving for authenticity and genuineness. So it really doesn't take a whole lot, if you think about it, to communicate effectively the gospel of Christ if we're authentic. Because believe me, that'll stand out like a sore thumb in this culture, to be authentic. There's a song, I think it's Matthew West, and I think several of us have talked about this song a few times because it's so powerful, I think. It's Child of the One True King. And that song is so powerful, I think, because, I mean, he's like, hello, my name is, and this is my identity. So it's kind of like fill in the blank. So again, kind of like, so who do you think I am? This is kind of, well, me. Who do I think I am? Hello, my name is. Am I an architect? Am I a marketer? Am I a communicator, a preacher, a stay-at-home mom, an educator? Or am I a child of the one true King? First and foremost, let's get that on the table, because that's who I am. And then we can talk about all of our other stuff that we do, because all those other things really are just avocations. They're not our true calling, hopefully. And if they are, if my career is my true calling and Christ is just kind of a side job, so to speak, then we need to flip that, don't we? We need to turn that around so that it comes out of us, it oozes out of us when we are talking to people that we are a child of the one true King. And that everything else comes after that and is put into context with that. And so that when we're talking in business relationships and friendships and whatnot, it comes out automatically that we are part of the kingdom and that we're living with a mission-oriented life. And that my very job that I'm doing just to put food on the table, I'm doing that for the Lord. And that's coming through, and people can see that. Not to be fake about it, not to make them just to see that, because that's not good either. We're not doing things to be seen. But if we're being real with people and being honest, that should be coming out. It shouldn't be one of those things like after 10 years of a friendship, they go, oh, I didn't know you were a Christian. What a slap on the face that would be, right? So we don't want to be that either. We don't want to be faking it and go, yeah, I'm a Christian, and then having all this stuff in our background that we're trying to hide. All of us are imperfect. We're all imperfect. So we want to be careful not to confuse the message of Christ and make that message unclear. And there's a hymn. It's one of my favorite hymns. Let's see if I got it. The verse that I like out of it is, it's called The World's Bible, or Christ Has No Hands But Our Hands, depending on what book you're looking in. But the words that I really like in this are, we are the only Bible the careless world will read. We are the sinner's gospel. We are the scoffer's creed. We're the world's last message given in deed and word. And here's where it's really powerful, I think. What if the type is crooked? And what if the print is blurred? If we are the gospel that our friends and our family and our coworkers are reading, because that's who they interact with that calls them a Christian, but the type is a little blurred on that, or we hit the wrong filter that day, then we're not communicating the gospel of Christ very effectively, are we? In fact, we're doing damage to it. We're putting a roadblock in front of someone because we're saying it's all about wealth and success and making it look like we're cool and hip or attractive or whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish with how we're presenting ourselves to people. But if we're not being real, then that type is crooked. That print is a little bit blurred, and we're confusing. We're obscuring the message of Christ. So if there's areas I think that we all need to stop plowing around that stump, so to speak, in our lives. Kaylee and I, we have this thing about mowing the lawn together. So we have this mower that we ride, and she sits on my lap, and like once a week, she looks forward to that. It's like, oh, I get to mow the lawn with Daddy. And so we ride around my lawnmower, and there's this tree that I chopped down. It took me like 6 months to finally get it chopped down, and because I'm a procrastinator. Another bit of piece of honesty there. I'm a procrastinator. Things will get pushed on my calendar when they shouldn't be. And so, winter would come. I cut the tree down before winter. This gives you some idea. I cut the tree down before winter. Then the first snow came, and I was like, I just have to wait till spring now. So it took a while to actually get the thing chopped up and get a chainsaw and get it all cleared out. But then that left the stump, and I was too much of a tightwad to rent a stump grinder. So I just cut it as low as I possibly could, and I took an axe to some of it. Well, it did pretty good. You don't see it from the street now, so it's pretty good. But when I go to mow that lawn, I can't do it yet because there's this one little sharp thing that sticks up like 6 inches. It would totally shatter my blade if I ran over it. So this was last fall when I actually did this, I still need to go back and get the rest of that stump out of there. I still have to go around that stump. I have to plow around that stump, in this case, mow around that stump. So a lot of us, we have things in our life that we've been plowing around those stumps for a while, those areas where I really like this filter. It makes me look good. But we got to stop mowing around that stump. Actually get off the lawnmower, get the axe out, take care of that piece of our life that we want to get out of there so that we can start being real and being honest. I'm going to leave you with a poem that I stuck on my pantry door because I figured everyone has to eat, right? And so this is a poem, and this is another true fact about me. I do write an occasional poem. I've written maybe a total of 5, so it's not like I'm very good at this. But this is one I wrote, and I stuck it on my pantry door because I really wanted our foster kids to see this in particular, and it's a good reminder for me to realize that our life is a sermon. Life is a sermon, but we don't often preach as well as we should, so we fail to reach the hearts of those who sit down in the pews expecting a sermon, but left somehow confused. Because our lives don't always preach the same message we had in our hearts when we stepped up to the pulpit. So are we just wasting time of those who would listen, preaching vacant words void of passion and mission? Or does our sermon deliver a powerful punch, a life-changing message of wisdom, such that people are inspired and leave their pews moved to know God a little deeper, anxious to choose to invest their lives wisely in people, not things, pouring love generously like a gift from the King? May your life be a sermon that points others to God, shedding light on the dark roads we all have to trod. Because there's nothing more wasted than a life without purpose, a sermon preached aimlessly, uninteresting, and worthless. Friends, I beg you, preach your life with such zeal, make the evidence unshakable that God's love is real. And I'm going to leave that with you, and if there's people that want to get real with God, and turn their life over to Him, and it's awesome that we had 14 people do that up at camp. I wish I could have been there for that. But if there's someone who has that on their heart right now, that you want to get real, it's time to stop faking it, and you want to turn your life over to God, this would be a good time to come forward and talk to someone as we stand and sing the closing song.